Tales from the Rails. Discovering the Stockton and Darlington Railway. The railway that got the world on track.
Hello and welcome to our 8th Tales from the Rails, our monthly podcast on the Stockton and Darlington Railway, the railway that got the world on track. This podcast is going to get you in the party mood as we explore the S&DR celebrations and commemorations. My name is Caroline Hardy.
And my name is Archie Mackay.
I'm an archaeologist and the editor and a trustee for the charity the Friends of the S&DR.
And I'm managing editor of South West Durham News, a small independent publisher of 4 community newspapers, including the Shildon and District Town Crier, produced right here in the cradle of the railways.
So this week on Tales from the Rails, we're talking about celebrations. Huzzah! How did the S&DR celebrate its achievements? How did we commemorate it after the S&DR no longer existed? We'll be talking about bunting and banquets, cold collations and cavalcades, statue unveilings and speech-making, exhibitions and processions, crocheting and model-making, and we'll even get the Druids in. This month's stars of the S&DR will be Thomas Meynell, who didn't say much on one notable occasion, but has truly left his mark as music lover and chair of a good party.
We'll also be letting you know about the latest news, so plug in your headphones and enjoy the ride on the railway that got the world on track.
Tales from the Rails. This podcast is brought to you by the Friends of the Stockton and Darlington Railway, a registered charity set up to safeguard and promote the heritage of the railway that got the world on track. You can join us by visiting our website at www.sdr1825.org.uk.
So, how to party like it's 1825?
1829.
1830?
1842.
1875?
1925.
Or 1975, but not 2000.
So, in case we haven't mentioned it before, 2025 will mark 200 years since the opening of the Stockton and Darlington Railway. Such celebrations have taken place regularly in the last 200 years, starting with the opening day itself. There were also celebrations when most of the branch lines opened.
These celebrations took a common form and had a common purpose. Once the S&DR was amalgamated with the NER, the nature and purpose of these celebrations changed. These took place in 1875 for the Jubilee, 1925 for the Centenary, 1975, which was the 150th anniversary. Nothing happened in 2000, embarrassing, and now we're preparing for the 200th anniversary in 2025.
So what was the purpose of these celebrations? We all like a good party, but the Quakers, who largely funded the railway, actually didn't like a good party at all, did they? So, Caroline, was there a difference between the opening day celebrations and subsequent commemorations once the S&DR as a company didn't exist?
Well, they had a different purpose. 1825 was about showing how the railway could be used, not just by colliery owners, but by mill owners, other extractive industries, and passengers, of course. It created a spectacle that was reported around the world, thus engaging the interest of foreign engineers and promoters. And of course, as a result of that, they were looking to create a market for the newly founded Robert Stevenson & Co., set up by S&DR key players in 1823. 1825 started the celebratory format with the creation of a processional train along the route, and this included wagons filled with goods likely to appeal to local businesses, plus passengers. Music was an important component of the celebrations and some sort of hospitality for invited guests. The opening day was also declared to be a bank holiday, so people could have time off work to watch the celebrations. Large flags on the train made declarations of commercial success and reinforced the company motto of Periculum Privatum Utilitas Publica. Workers and directors were distinguished by the wearing of blue ribbons or sashes. On the S&DR, the invite list was mainly engineers and business owners. But as confidence grew in the railway experiment, other railway companies in other parts of the UK would actually have royalty attending, or the nobility at very least.
So, what was the next S&DR celebratory event?
Well, the first branch to be opened after September 1825 was the Yarm branch in October of that year. The opening was described by the Durham County Advertiser on the 22nd of October 1825 as follows. On Monday last, the first regular supply to Yarm consisting of 20 wagons arrived at that place and were immediately sold at about half of the price that the inhabitants were accustomed to pay. In the evening, about 60 respectable tradesmen met at the New Inn at the end of the Yarm branch of the railway to celebrate the event, as also that of the opening of the said inn, where an excellent supper was provided by the landlord, Mr. Snowdon. Mr. Meynell's band attended and performed several appropriate airs during the evening. Some gentlemen also favoured the company with a variety of songs and were joined in the choruses by members of the band. The health of the chairman of the railway company was drank with enthusiastic cheers, as also of those of other gentlemen of Yarm with whom the idea of this great undertaking originated, and to whose perseverance in an early stage of the work the public are so much indebted for the present greatly reduced price of coal. The evening passed away to the delight of all present. About 50 of the workmen and labourers were regaled with supper in an adjoining room.
You can read more about the Yarm branch in a book written by the Yarm branch study group of the Friends of the Stockton and Darlington Railway and available on our website and at Locomotion in Shildon. The next branch line to be opened after 1825 was the Blackboy branch in 1827. What celebrations took place then?
Well, the opening of this branch line had been scheduled for an earlier date, but the finances were tight. And perhaps for this reason, this branch appears to have been opened without any sort of celebratory event. Yes.
Then, in 1829, there was the opening of the Croft branch. How was that marked?
Well, the opening day started with a procession of numerous coaches, each drawn by one horse, crowded with from 30 to 50 passengers and supplied with banners. These were followed by a train of wagons laden with coals from every different mine for the supply of the North Riding.
OK, so it doesn't appear that locomotives were used in the opening of this branch.
No, and they weren't much used on this line after the opening either. I guess the main purpose of this procession was to show potential customers in the North Riding that coal delivered by train would bring its price right down. The celebrations then continued with a cold collation, what you and I might call a buffet, at Croft Spa Hotel under the supervision of the S&amp company solicitor Francis Mewburn. Mewburn's vision, as pronounced on that day, was of a railway that one day might allow travellers to lunch in Darlington and take an opera in London the same evening. Archie, have you managed to lunch in Darlington and take an opera in London the same evening?
You know, I can't really say that I have, Caroline. In fact, probably if I had lunch in Darlington, I'd struggle to take in an opera in Darlington in the evening. Again, there's a report on the Croft branch written on behalf of Darlington Borough Council in 2019 in the Friends online library. 1830 was a busy year, with the opening of 2 additional branch lines, plus the widening of existing lines and the building of more bridges. I can't imagine they had the time or the resources to party.
Oh, but they did. In fact, the Hagar-Leazy's branch line, which opened in 1830, opened in 2 stages. And what does that mean? It means 2 opening ceremonies. The day was reported in the Durham Chronicle on the 8th of May 1830 and followed a now well-established format with a procession of railway coaches carrying about 30 people each from Darlington and several wagons from Brusselton, all drawn by horses. As the procession approached West Stockland, the number of spectators gathered amounting to 3,000 people, according to the excited reporter at the time. As with other openings organised by the S&DR, banners and flags waved boasting the company motto Periculum Privatum Utilitas Publica. Staff wore blue favours or ribbons, and a band was accommodated in specially fitted wagons to provide the musical accompaniment. So, pretty similar to the opening day in 1825, but again without a locomotive. By the 2nd of October, the rest of the Hagar-Leazy's branch opened to the public all the way to the terminus at Hagar-Leazy's Lane, about where Butternowell is today. To commemorate the opening, there was a gathering at the offices of the Butternowell and Copley Collieries belonging to Reverend Prattman. Prattman provided the usual cold collation available at such events and took the opportunity to express concern about the number of accidents on railways. I think Prattman might have been quite a tricky customer and was a bit cheesed off that it had taken so long to get to the area where he owned mines on the track. However, maybe this was a set-up and offered an opportunity to correct some myths about railway accidents. So Joseph Pease responded with a speech correcting some of the erroneous information that had been spread about accidents on the S&AR after the death of Lord Huskisson at the opening of the Liverpool and Manchester Railway on the 15th of September, only a few weeks before. This included mistaken figures in the press, suggesting that the S&AR had suffered 50 casualties instead of a mere 15. The rest of the open day followed what was now a traditional opening ceremony, and was reported in the local press as follows. Over to you, Archie.
About 4 o'clock, the company proceeded down the railway in procession. A party of ladies occupied one of the railway company's coaches, followed by the Staindrop Amateur Band, in wagons fitted for the purpose, and whose performances contributed much to enliven the day, and the rear was brought up by a number of wagons laden with coal, the workmen, etc., with banners bearing appropriate inscriptions. In this order they proceeded to St. Helens, Auckland, where the company separated, highly gratified with the proceedings of the day.
I have to say, it's quite unusual to see direct references to ladies having an active role at these ceremonies, so it was quite pleasing to find this. The multiple purpose use of the branch line was noted by the journalists in both accounts of the opening ceremonies, referring to coal and lead mining, and
inexhaustible quarries of white freestone and whinstone, the value and utility of which, for the purpose of building and road making, are so well known and appreciated.
The railway improving such connections was certainly going to result in a very profitable undertaking for the company, but also an extensive benefit to the public. Which brings me on to the Middlesbrough branch line, which opened on December the 27th, 1830. Now, I love this opening ceremony. A train of passenger coaches and wagons hauled by the Globe opened the line. The Globe was a locomotive designed by Timothy Hackworth to haul passenger traffic. The wagons carried a single block of coal weighing over 2 tons from Blackboy Colliery, which was now served by the Blackboy branch line. The new staiths, also designed by Timothy Hackworth, were tried out. Then, 600 guests entertained at dinner in the specially decorated gallery of the staiths, under the chairmanship of Francis Mewburn. There were free rides, refreshments, the firing of guns, and great demonstrations of joy. The staiths were lit by portable gas, the first ever burnt in Middlesbrough. The committee had a medal struck in honour of the event, which was generally worn that day, being pierced with 2 holes, which enabled them to be threaded with ribbon and worn round the neck. The obverse had a view of the staiths, and the reverse a view of the suspension bridge across the Tees at Stockton. This hardy bunch managed to have a marvellous time on the riverside in late December. It must have been freezing.
And catering for 600 in an area that hadn't yet been populated, and where there were very few houses and only one inn, must have been very challenging. Presumably the dinner was brought in by train too. Even if it was designed to be hot, being served under the staiths in December probably meant it was a cold collation, just like at Hagley's and Croft.
And this format continued throughout the life of the S&AR, but I just want to mention one other opening ceremony, largely because it's another wacky one. This was the opening of the Shildon Tunnel, then called the Prince of Wales Tunnel, in 1842. The tunnel provided a more direct and efficient locomotive-powered route into Weardale and took traffic away from the less efficient inclines. So, I've borrowed heavily from an account of this opening by Chris Lloyd for the Northern Echo back in 2007, and also an earlier account from the NER magazine of 1913. At 10 a.m. on Monday, January the 10th, 1842, a ceremonial procession set off from the Cross Keys Inn in Cheapside in Shildon. Sadly, that inn's no longer there. It was led by a Union flag with the resident engineer, Luke Wandless, directly behind. On his right was Henry Booth, the principal contractor, and on his left, Thomas Dennis, the principal brickmaker. Accompanied by banners and a brass band, they went in through the southern entrance of the tunnel. The darkness was relieved by innumerable candles, and a platform had been erected at which a ceremony took place, said the North Eastern Railway magazine in 1913. Mr. Dennis ceremonially presented the last brick. Mr. Booth ceremonially sprinkled it with wine. Mr. Wandless ceremonially cemented it into place with a suitably inscribed silver trowel. That very same trowel is now at Locomotion Museum. The gentlemen then ceremonially named it the Prince of Wales Tunnel, after Prince Albert Edward, Queen Victoria's first son, who'd been born 2 months earlier, and in 60 years' time would become King Edward VII. Simultaneously, cannon were fired in the open air, and the band struck up the popular tune of the time, Merrily Danced the Quaker's Wife. The procession wandered on through the darkness to the northern end of the tunnel, and for those who don't know it, it's a long way, about 1.2 kilometres. Then dinner was laid on for the workmen in 6 pubs in Shildon and 50 VIPs tucked in at the Cross Keys, so they all had to walk back again into Shildon. They were then joined by Engineer-in-Chief Thomas Storey and the Company Secretary Thomas McNay. He said, wait for this, he hoped the time was not far distant when they would see locomotive engines and trains passing through the wild district about Crook, where the people had never seen such a thing before.
So we have publicly accessible processions, flag waving, wagons laid with goods that represent whatever the branch line hoped to carry, and music, celebratory food and drink, and toasting whereby invitation only and workers and VIPs dined in separate places.
And there's barely any reference to women attending the invitation-only events, apart from those ladies in wagons at Hagerleazy's. It's less clear whether they were invited to the dinners or the cold collations.
So, back in June, we also covered the celebrations associated with turning Locomotion No. 1 into a museum piece.
Yes, by 1857 it was becoming clear to the S&DR pioneers that the role of the S&DR in bringing railways to the world needed to be recognised formally. So it was decided that Locomotion No. 1 should be repaired and restored and placed on a plinth outside the station at North Road as a memento of the past, was the way they put it. The laying of the foundation stone on the 6th of June 1857 was carried out by Henry Pease and was accompanied by celebrations held for the goods agents and invited guests at the Sun Inn in Darlington. Guests were also invited to roam the grounds at Piermont in Darlington, where Henry Pease resided. Additional trains were laid on that day for the invited guests to use, and so this was really the start of commemorating the railway as the start of something new that had changed the world forever. In Henry Pease's own words,
I rejoiced at seeing the first locomotive about to be placed in a suitable position so as to hand down to posterity a memorial of one of the greatest events the civilised world ever witnessed. Remarkable.
Absolutely. The other celebration in 1857 was a gathering of the railway populace and residents outside Edward Pease's house to mark his achievements through speeches. By 1857, Edward Pease was 90 and still living in his house on Northgate in Darlington, where he and his long-since-deceased wife Rachel had brought up their 8 children. The local population and railway staff, led by his old friend and colleague Francis Mewburn, wanted to collect a subscription and to commemorate the great and invaluable services of his old and firmest friend, have a bronze statue of Edward placed in the town to be accompanied by testimonials. But Edward was having none of this, as he considered such displays to be a vanity. He reluctantly conceded to an address to be read outside his house, acknowledging his contribution to the railway revolution. Edie could listen to it alongside visiting family members. The speech, written on a scroll, was delivered by Francis Mewburn and was long, including as it did contributions from railway companies from all over the UK. It was a national celebration of Pease's achievements and was the start of making the role of the Pease family central to any S&DR commemorative events, and in doing so, also making Darlington the focus of these events. Here is an oft-quoted extract from the speech.
In times less enlightened and more prejudiced than these, with amazing foresight, you penetrated the necessity of unbroken communication by railways, and in 1818 predicted the extension of that system which now spreads a network over the civilised world, binding nations together for the interchange of mutual interests. So the S&DR amalgamated with the NER in 1863. That obviously wasn't the end of S&DR celebrations, though, was it, Caroline?
So now the commemorations that happened subsequently, every 50 years or so, were different in purpose and content. These commemorations were the subject of a PhD thesis by Sophie Vora, who was at York University at the time. She outlined the purpose of these post-S&DR commemorations as civic pride, fostering an area's social identity, cementing the commercial image of the NER and the LNER afterwards, solidifying the country's image as the home of invention and pioneering engineering, and to suggest how that might develop into the future. They also cemented the belief that the SNDR was pioneering, but in doing so, there was a tendency for the message to be oversimplified.
And I think that continues to be a problem today.
Certainly is.
So if the SNDR didn't exist anymore as a fully independent body, who organised the parties?
These post-SNDR commemorative events were steered heavily by the railway companies in 1875 and 1925. Yes, to enhance civic pride, but they also had a commercial value in promoting and enhancing the image of the North Eastern Railway, which amalgamated with the SNDR in 1863, and the LNER, which was formed in 1923. They were national and international events, but it was also simply fashionable at the time to mark centenaries and jubilees, and the more that were celebrated generally, the more other communities joined in with greater spectacles celebrating the past. And in looking to the past, back to 1825, the companies used this to gauge progress achieved since then and to solidify their position in the present as an important and relevant modern invention, and to further suggest how it would continue to develop in the future. 1975 was slightly different, as it was steered by an S&D 150 committee who worked over 3 years to bring a range of events, especially within a festival week in August. Obviously, this was because railways had been nationalised by then, and so we didn't have individual companies to set the celebratory agenda. With each celebratory event, there was a procession or cavalcade, and an exhibition where locomotives were lined up to create a relative chronology, so a narrative was presented backwards in time and forwards to the future. Locomotion number 1 was invariably at the beginning, but now one could also admire the advances achieved since then with significantly larger and more powerful machines lined up alongside, dwarfing the little 1825 engine.
So let's start with 1875, 50 years after the SNDR opened, and only 12 since it was amalgamated with the NER. What happened to commemorate the SNDR's Jubilee, and what was the intended message?
The 1875 events concentrated in September of that year and appear to have been mostly in Darlington. An exhibition of locomotives was held and a statue to Joseph Pease unveiled at High Row in Darlington, the two elements linked by a procession. This procession had representatives from various groups, including directors of railway companies and mayors of numerous towns and cities, and the Pease Memorial Committee. But what you might not expect included friendly societies in the following order, each in the procession 4 abreast. Temperance societies at the front, then the Free Gardeners, then Foresters, then Friendly Society, then Oddfellows, which had 4 groups, the Kingston Order, the National Independent, Grand Unity, and an Independent Order, then Smiths, then Druids, then Stonemasons.
Wow, Druids. So what were the Druids doing there?
Well, they were not the Iron Age priests from ancient Britain and Brittany, but, well, they were, but not in this case. They were one of the friendly societies formed where groups of workers joined together to provide sickness benefit schemes. So they might meet in a pub and each chip in some money to a kitty to help out colleagues fallen on hard times as a consequence of ill health, or, if appropriate, their widows and children. They formed area groups or lodges, and they like to operate like a secret society with rituals and secret handshakes.
So a bit like the Masons then?
Yeah, a wee bit like that, yes. The Ancient Order of Druids was formed in London in 1781. Its motto was justice, philanthropy and brotherly love. Schism in the community led to a split in 1833 and a new motto for the new group, United to Assist, which was a bit more inclusive. They named their friendly society after the Druids because it was felt that the Druids were protectors of ancient Britain and Brittany. Such friendly societies were popular in coal mining communities, so we can see why the Druids and the other friendly societies were included in the procession.
Yeah, so back to Darlington in 1875.
So, as we've heard, Joseph's father, Edward, had refused a statue, but the younger generation took a different view. Joseph, who had held important roles with the SDR since he was only 19, was also the country's first Quaker politician. In fact, there were plans to erect a statue to Joseph Pease before the Jubilee celebrations were planned, but there was obviously a distinct advantage in combining the two events, consequently show the extent to which the Peases, who were still active in the railway and local politics, were the constant thread that ran through the railway history. It was also an opportunity for Darlington to promote the idea that Darlington was the start of the modern railway, and it certainly featured much more than Shildon or Stockton in the events. The day was declared a public holiday throughout the district. 100,000 people are said to have filled the streets, 80,000 of them arriving from out of town in special trains. All the mayors of the United Kingdom were present for the unveiling of the statue, a service performed by the Duke of Cleveland, whose family had over the years actually attempted to thwart the development of the S&DR. Illustrations of the unveiling show all the usual components of earlier celebratory events: a trumpet fanfare, gun salutes, crowds of men and women based on the illustrations of the time, and banners declaring success to the North Eastern Railway. A banquet was held at Feetham's, where Sainsbury's is now, in a large marquee. 2 top tables had VIPs, and then 36 other long tables accommodated guests. This was not open to the public. Local reporter James Stephen Jeans, who was entrusted with writing a history of the S&DR and the Jubilee celebrations, listed the guests as
chairmen and secretaries of all the principal railway companies in the world, the members of Parliament, bishops, mayors and town clerks on the North Eastern system and the principal industries in the north, and last but not least, the members of the present cabinet and the members of the government of Mr. Gladstone. So, the world was invited to pay homage to the S&DR, but you were more likely to get an invite if you represented the larger, wealthier companies.
And if you were a man. Curiously, there was a ladies' gallery to one side in the marquee, but it had no tables. Does that mean the ladies were not invited to eat, but were invited to watch the men eat? It's possible, as clearly there were no female bishops, railway directors, mayors or industrialists, but only the wives of such. What a worry. The band of the Grenadier Guards provided the musical accompaniment. The menu was heavily influenced by French fashions. How's your French, Archie? Do you want to select a few dishes? We've got the menu in front of us.
Oui, not.
Everything's written in French, and there are several courses. The first is potage, which is soup. The soups sound quite unpleasant, actually, so we'll move on. The next course is a sort of a second starter, if you like. So looking at the list of dishes, is there anything in there that you think you would pick, Archie?
Well, sauce on mayonnaise sounds a bit like fish to me, so I think I would be okay with that.
Yes, jambon à l'anglaise. Yes, langue de bœuf à la moderne. Oh, pâté de foie gras. Recognise that, yes. Yes, it's quite an extensive list, actually, of second starters. So then they move on to a buffet, which just seems to have a choice of 2 things: aspic de homard or barons of beef.
Okay, so I know what beef is, but what's aspic de homard?
Oh, actually, I did look this up and I've forgotten. It's shellfish.
Oh, yes. Oh, okay. Oh,
yes,
well,
come back to me.
I'm an island boy, so I love my shellfish. So.
Right. So then you move on to what they call entremets, which are the puddings. So crème à la Victorie.
Crème.
Meringue à la crème.
Oh, crème.
Pâtisserie à la Grande Duchesse. A gâteau à la Royale.
This is the part of the menu that, it's really not very nice for me to have to read, given that I'm currently trying to lose weight.
I know, I probably ought to be doing the same, but when I look at a menu, I actually look at the puddings first and then work my way backwards. Yeah. So if you weren't already stuffed from all that, they then have a fruit course, which has got pineapples, peaches, and then glacé. So they must finish off with ice cream or maybe a sorbet to cleanse the palate at the end.
Wow, yeah. So that's how many courses is that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 courses. That's not bad.
And that's not including all the toasts with all the drink as well.
Lovely.
So there was also a ball for local people on the 29th September, fireworks display each evening over the 27th to the 29th, and excursions and tea meetings. So they were much more inclusive. Some of the illustrative material in the newspapers included Stevenson's rocket, amongst other images, which were exclusively otherwise the S&DR. Of course, rocket had nothing to do with the S&DR, but was often cited because it was also an early Stevenson locomotive, and Stevenson Both of them, George and Robert, were being celebrated as much as the railway. But here we see the start of people confusing rocket and locomotion number 1, and that's still going on, sadly. Authoritative accounts were written including James's tome on the early railways, and really the historic background to the NER. Darlington was dressed for the occasion with floral arrangements, bunting, signs, illuminations, and an avenue of Venetian pillars that stretched along Victoria Road, each one capped with a large banner, many of which had been actually prepared by the local people in the town. The banners promoted pioneers of railway enterprise, with the names Stevenson, Meynell, Flounders, Pease, Kitching, Gilks, Mewburn, Dixon, Backhouse and McNay on side scrolls. While some of the banners created by local people had simple phrases including "Knowledge is power" and the double entendre phrase "Take care of number 1," others were more intricate. Decorations by Theodore West, a draftsman at the North Road shop in Darlington, included a banner that celebrated engineering and innovation hung at the Railway Institute on North Road. The illustrations lauded particular engineers, Watt for inventing the stationary engine, Stephenson for the locomotive, and Fulton for introducing steam navigation. And there was considerable focus on the Peaseys, George and Robert Stephenson and Francis Mewburn, but less so on Hackworth and the lesser-known S&DR pioneers that made the S&DR possible, and women clearly hadn't been invented yet.
Well, I've seen some souvenirs from this time, but what sort of things were produced?
Well, there certainly were commemorative souvenirs in 1875. There was a plate produced of Joseph Peasey's statue, and around the circumference of the plate there were pictures of other leading lights, including Henry Fell Pease, who was MP for Cleveland, Edmund Backhouse, who was MP for Darlington, George Stephenson, no introduction required, and Richard Luck, representing St Cuthbert's Parish. 2 locomotives are also depicted, number 1 from 1825, representing the beginning of the modern railway, and possibly number 1269, which was built in November 1874 at the North Road Works in Darlington, and representing the latest in locomotive development. It was also possible to buy blue ribbons to reflect the ribbons worn by railway staff on the 1825 Open Day, but these ribbons had been Victorianised with gold braid and a picture of locomotion number 1 stamped on them. And there were handkerchiefs and napkins depicting locomotion number 1, and souvenir programmes, books and photograph albums published.
OK, so our celebrations are heading to 100 years after the Stockton and Darlington Railway opened in 1925. How was that occasion, Mark?
Well, the 1925 events were organised by the LNER by then, and believe it or not, the Pease family were still involved through Arthur Pease. Planning for the event started back in 1923, and this time events were planned not just in Darlington but also Stockton and Yarm. 1923 was significant in the railway industry because that's when the big 4 companies came into operation, of which the LNER was one. The 1925 celebrations offered an opportunity to promote this new arrangement, but also to set down a marker for the future. A future where cars are beginning to offer a practical alternative to passenger rail travel. The presence of royalty gave the celebrations a national flavour, and the international guests attending the International Railway Conference from the 22nd of June to the 4th of July gave the celebrations an international flavour. Such was the perceived importance of this conference that the S&DR celebrations were actually brought forward, they were originally planned for September, to early July to coincide with the conference. An exhibition and banqueting hall were located at the Faverdale Wagon Works in Darlington and opened on the 1st of July. The exhibition displayed the usual relative chronology of pioneering locomotives plus smaller exhibits, and the rolling stock was sourced from the big 4 companies and the Metropolitan Railway Company. The exhibition area was surrounded with a motor park, tea rooms, loos, and the St John's ambulance station in case the excitement all got too much for some. Once again, there was a banquet for invited guests at Faverdale and a lunch for the Duke and Duchess of York, who were later King George and Queen Elizabeth, and invited guests only at Stockton Borough Hall. There was a procession of locomotives along the line and royal progresses in Stockton and Darlington town centres. The procession was available to view by a range of spectators. A grandstand was erected where Teesside Airport is today, with paid plank seating provided for members of the general public, and a section of the fields nearby was reserved for the car club, and the public were charged sixpence to view the cavalcade from the fields in Yarm next to the line. The programme described the procession as thoroughly representative of a century of progress in the art of providing comfortable travel. In amongst the railway vehicles, there were a series of tableaux to show the evolution of the wheel in transport, with a banner above each saying how long since the present day each of these scenes were set. They make for slightly uncomfortable viewing today. Locomotion number 1 was no longer up and running, so an engine was attached to it and a wet newspaper lit and sent up the chimney, so it looked like it was smoking. It hauled a replica train, which included the version of Experiment, where it looks like a garden shed, and that version is largely discredited now. A plaque was unveiled by the Duke and Duchess at St John's Crossing in Stockton. This plaque claimed that here was where the first passenger was booked in 1825, but this is hogwash. The buildings weren't even there in 1825. Neither was it the terminus in 1825, and at that date passengers would have booked in inns in the town centre that ran the service, not walked to the outskirts where there was a well and the main line passed, but nothing else. Notably, all the events could be attended by train, and visiting locomotives had large areas of marshalling yards to gather in. And souvenir programmes featured not just the events, but adverts from local businesses, all seeking to establish a link with the pioneering vision of the SNDR, the great men associated with it, and their business ambitions.
So you mentioned earlier that by 1975, 150 years after the SNDR opened, the NER and the LNER no longer existed and the railways were run by British Rail. How did that work out?
So these commemorations were organised by the S&D 150 committee. The main event that most people remember is the steam cavalcade. It was only a few years since steam had stopped being used on the railways, and the large railway works at Darlington and Shildon were still open and functioning. If locomotion number 1 hadn't been fit to run in 1925, it certainly wasn't 50 years later. Under the supervision of Mike Sato, student engineers with the support of local businesses built a replica locomotion number 1, which was used in the cavalcade. Harold Wilson, then Prime Minister, was one of many to visit.
And you can see the photos of Mike Sato and his team building the replica on the Friends website. Just look up the archive section.
Behind the scenes, education packs were produced by the local education authorities, books written, and a huge range of souvenirs such as mugs, glasses, plates, inexplicably showing an early locomotive that wasn't locomotion number 1, ties and table mats, coasters, posters, aprons, flower pots, ashtrays, and my favourite, a tin of steam. Have you seen the tin of steam?
No, I haven't. Does it make a whistle or anything?
No, it's a tin. It's got a picture on it of a steam engine. It says it's a tin of steam, but it defies you to say otherwise, because by the time you've opened it...
You didn't open that, do you?
No. Do you think people would still buy that?
Quite possibly nowadays.
Hackworth's house was rescued thanks to the exertions of the Hackworth family and Sedgefield District Council, and was opened by the Queen Mother back after her earlier trip in 1925 when she was Duchess of York. North Road Station was rescued from vandalism and decay and turned into a railway museum opened by the Duke of Edinburgh. And Robert Young's book on Hackworth, which was first published in 1923, was published again, and souvenir programmes were produced. The adverts on these programmes yet again promoted local businesses who were keen to make a link between the pioneering spirit of the SNDR and their business. Photographs from 1925 were published in it, and a section of locomotives through time, finishing with a high-speed train. A special radio station operated.
The 1975 equivalent of our podcasts, I suppose.
I guess so. I haven't actually heard any of them. I don't know if any are out there in an archive. There was also a display of locomotives and coaches, a festival of railway films, a railway book and print fair in Darlington. There were flower displays, jewellery exhibitions. Peyton and Baldwin's worked with the S&D 150 committee to produce an exhibition called Fashion Through the Steam Age. Schools, photography clubs, art galleries all did their bit, while country dancers and brass bands performed throughout the summer. And pre-arranged visits could also be made to Cleveland Bridge and Engineering Company Limited, Cummins Engines, Darlington and Simpson Rolling Mills, Wessel Limited and Peyton and Baldwin's. The main railway exhibition was at the Magnet Bowl in Darlington and was opened by Willie Whitelaw, who many of us will remember as a politician, but he was also the grandson of Sir William Whitelaw, the first chair of the LNER. 15 railway companies from across the world were represented here, and the display was wider than locomotives and coaches provided by museums and private collectors. There was an operational model of the S&DR built by the members of the Americana Model Railway Club of Darlington. There were exhibitions of early locomotive paintings, contemporary models of early locomotives, a display of railway lighting systems, a model of an NER breakdown crane unit, souvenirs, and many more. The entrance was via a souvenir ticket, which was a replica of an original S&DR one. Entry was 40 pence for adults, 20 pence for children and for old age pensioners, but these old folks were only allowed in, at that rate, Mondays to Fridays. Stay at home at the weekends. Walk routes were created to explore the inclines, but not all of these seem to have resulted in permanent rights of way, so we're having to go through all this again for 2025. Darlington, it was said in the souvenir programme, will always be remembered as the birthplace of all railways. So said A. Suddis, the assistant curator of Darlington Museum. A somewhat inaccurate statement, rather to the detriment of the 300 years of railway history prior to 1825. Now, the year 2000 should have been the 175th anniversary. Well, it was, but nothing happened. There was a flutter of activity, but a lack of moral fibre or resources resulted in no events at all. So, moving on.
So, how will 2025 compare to the past?
I think there are going to be probably a couple of main differences. In previous years, steam trains were either still running or had been running only a few years previously. The infrastructure to create steam cavalcades was still available. All the marshalling yards were still there, all the water tanks were still there, but they've all gone now. Further, Network Rail are understandably less accommodating of slow-moving steam engines on live lines. The standards of health and safety have increased considerably. All of you who were allowed to walk in front of the steam cavalcade in 1975, and I've seen you on the videos, there's not a chance of that being permitted in 2025. And for steam engines to travel on live line, they have to be adapted to modern standards, and it simply isn't possible for many of these museum pieces. And the cost of transporting locomotives is also immense, especially if they're coming from abroad. So in 2025, there will be less live steam than in previous years, but it won't be absent completely. Both Locomotion and Hopetown have short stretches of line where live steam can take place, and nearby heritage railways are also able to offer live steam events such as Weardale Railway and Kirkby Stephen. There may also be some particular live steam events which are being announced actually around the 26th, 27th, 28th of September. The latest technology means that people will be able to make their own virtual cavalcade using digital technology to create games that will appeal to younger people. These games are about collecting vehicles to form your own virtual cavalcade, and you couldn't have done that in the past. Perhaps one of the biggest differences is a cultural one. To what extent will businesses be involved? In 1975, we were still a manufacturing country, but it's maybe less true now. We no longer have a nationalised rail industry, or at least not wholly. And the business of rail operators owning rolling stock and another business owning the track has taken us right back to 1825, and that can make it a bit more difficult to coordinate events. That means fewer manufacturing businesses will be opening their doors to show off their innovative wares. Importantly, it's not clear to me to what extent we'll be looking forward as well as backwards, using the anniversary as an opportunity to celebrate modern innovation. We do have international businesses along the line, and the Friends have already engaged with Hitachi, A.V. Dawson and Husqvarna, who've leapt at the chance to get involved and are keen to make links with the S&DR story. But will we see the latest in rail technology as part of the celebrations? Will they have something to celebrate and look forward to? Will rail travel be promoted as part of the solution to climate change by creating sustainable, affordable and reliable travel options for the public? The cynic in me suggests that we're quite a long way from that. Will 2025 give the government or rail operators an opportunity to announce aspirations for the future? Will it be used to promote the renationalisation of railways suggested in the King's speech this year? The culture of current innovation and forward-looking technology as it has previously sat within the celebrations is still not clear to me, but this may well change by 2025. But in many other respects, much of what happened in 1975 will be happening again, but using different technology. Although flower arranging, crocheting and knitting and Morris dancing may not have changed very much at all, and we will be seeing the replica locomotion from 1975 in action once more. One big change I fully expect to see, or at least I hope we do, is more women participating in the main festival events. Indeed, the festival director is a woman, Nikki Halifax. No more invitations to gentlemen only, please. No more sidelining women to viewing calories when the men live it up on fancy food. No more overlooking their contribution when we write the history of railways. Bugger that. So here are my toasts, in the spirit of toasts given to every celebratory event in the past. To businesses and the wealthy who invest in their communities just as the Quakers believed we should do. To volunteers who have done much of the work that will make 2025 a success and beyond. To innovation. To creating opportunities for everyone. To everyone who excelled after getting a second chance at education. George Stephenson is your role model. To everyone who waited until they retired to excel. Edward Pease is your role model. To the musicians that make every celebratory event more fun. And finally, to the women who help make it happen by supporting their families, by taking over businesses and running them while caring for their families, who gathered their skirts and migrated to pastures new, leaving their support network behind. To the women who've been forgotten, who didn't get an invite at the banquets, the cold collations, or the respected suppers. Here's to you all.
Stars of the SNDR.
Well, Caroline, thank you very much for all of those additional toasts, as if it wasn't enough to have all of those celebrations from 1825 onwards. I'm now thoroughly sozzled. But yes, Stars of the SNDR. Who do we have this month?
Well, Thomas Meynell was at the heart of most celebrations while the SNDR was still functioning. He was born in Craythorne, North Yorkshire, on the 11th of April 1763, the son of Joseph Meynell and his wife Frances Newsom. On the 28th of August 1804, he married Teresa Mary Wright in London. The following year, they had a son, Thomas, named after his father, and in 1827 they had a daughter, Teresa, named after her mother. No worries about what to call the first two children then. Then they had another son, Edward.
He was an eminent local landowner with seats at the Friarage at Yarm, now Yarm School, and Kilvington near Thirsk. Unlike many landlords who viewed the Stockton and Darlington Railway in a negative light, Meynell was enthusiastic about the scheme and saw its economic opportunities.
Meynell employed Jeremiah Cairns as his land steward in Yarm. Cairns' sister was wife to an engineer from South Wales, George Overton. In 1818, Overton was employed to conduct a survey ascertaining the benefits of canal versus railway, and he came down on the side of a horse-drawn railway from west of Shildon to Stockton Wharf. As a result of this, Overton was to produce the first plan of the route for the SNDR, which was the subject of the 1821 Act of Parliament.
Meynell purchased £3,000 worth of shares to support the railway. In recognition of his status as a major landowner and his support of the railway, he was appointed the chairman of the Stockton and Darlington Railway on 12th May 1821, although he served in this capacity for earlier versions of the committee before the company was formally founded.
An early committee meeting resolved that Meynell and Edward Pease should approach suitable candidates to build the railway, who appointed George Stephenson as the line's engineer. So here is Chris Lloyd of the Northern Echo to tell us all about the laying of the first rail in May 1822.
On May the 23rd, 1822, Thomas Meynell had the honour of laying the Stockton-Darlington Railway's first rail. He was pulled in his carriage by 300 cheering, singing navvies from his home in Yarm, 5 miles into Stockton, with the Yarm Town Band in front, joyfully umpiring away. With him was Benjamin Flanders, a Quaker who owned linen mills at Craythorne and who had invested heavily in the railway. For the occasion, a half-day holiday had been declared in Stockton, and at the town hall, Mr. Meynell and Mr. Flounders met the mayor of Stockton, Richard Jackson, and the recorder, Leonard Raisbeck. With the band still playing, they turned round on themselves and processed down the high street again to St. John's Well, a spring of apparently health-giving water that gushes out of the ground just outside the town centre. And now there gushes lots of traffic past it because it's the site of a busy road junction. Construction of the railway from Stockton to Darlington to Shildon had properly begun on May the 13th, 1822, and by May the 23rd they were ready for the grand ceremonial laying of the first rail. And at 3 p.m. that Thursday, the band fell silent as Mr. Meynell did the honours. But he was a man of few words, and he didn't feel the need to make a speech. He didn't feel the need to say anything at all. Instead, a celebratory cannon, boom, was let off in a nearby field, and that was a signal for the band to strike up the national anthem. I'm sure the lack of speechifying for once pleased everybody who was present. It enabled the VIPs to promptly process back to the town hall for the celebratory meal, while the 300 workmen, who must have been pretty knackered after dragging Mr. Meynell's carriage about for miles, they were able to dash into the town centre and avail themselves of free bread, cheese and ale in the Black Lion Hotel, which was run by Martha Howson, and she would later run a passenger service from the Black Lion using the railway. Now, all that free bread, cheese and ale ensured that the celebrations dragged on through the afternoon into the evening and much later into the night. And before closing time, an entrepreneurial young boy toured the streets of Stockton, selling souvenirs of that historic day. For a halfpenny, he would sell anybody who wanted one a document, which he said was a full and faithful report of what Mr. Meynell had said at the opening. The boy would take the souvenir seeker's halfpennies, and then he would scarper sharpish. The purchasers would open up their mementos of the historic day and discover to their horror that they had bought a blank sheet of paper. "Hey!" they yelled after the fleeing boy. "There's no speech here, you young rascal." And in a good local accent that I don't have, he would reply, "I know that. He made no speech."
Mr. Meynell also had an important role on the opening day. Indeed, he wore many hats that day. At lunchtime, when the train stopped at Darlington, his band from Yarm got on board 2 wagons behind Experiment and provided a musical accompaniment for the rest of the journey. I suspect he may have been in Experiment as a VIP, rather than conducting the band from inside the adapted wagons. It's often referred to as Mr. Meynell's band, but this might simply have meant that he funded them rather than playing in the band himself.
When the train arrived at Stockton's quayside, the band played God Save the King, then got out and led a procession into town where the workers went into the inns and invited VIPs went to the town hall. Mr. Meynell's band went into a side room and continued playing, but Mr. Meynell himself, as the chair of the S&AR, chaired the banquet and after the removal of the cloth, started the 23 toasts with a toast to the King.
I didn't know what removal of the cloth was until I started looking into this. Do you know what that is?
I can't say that I do, removal of the cloth.
I think we were badly brought up, Archie.
What is it?
Removal of the cloth is when you take away the tablecloth after the main course because it's probably got splashes of gravy on it by then. And you either have another clean cloth sitting underneath, ready, so you can have your pudding on a nice clean tablecloth, or you would just have the bare wood of the table. So removal of the cloth is after the main course and before the pudding.
Ah, okay. Well, the reason I probably don't know anything about that is because I think the cloth was removed permanently in our table.
Well, I do the laundry in our house, and so I'm not having 2 tablecloths. Anyway, his special relationship with the S&AR manifested itself in other ways. The railway company owned the Yarm branch, having bought the land from Mr. Meynell, but the depot at its terminus, although operating as an S&AR depot, remained in the ownership of Mr. Meynell, who presumably saw the financial benefits in retaining ownership of it, but renting it back to the S&AR. This arrangement existed nowhere else at this date and did lead to some complexities. Mr. Meynell commissioned the S&AR to build his depot that he owned, possibly to a different design than the other depots owned by the S&AR and which had been designed by George Stephenson.
The Cleveland Bay was known as the New Inn when it opened beside the depot at the terminus of the Yarm branch. It was also owned and commissioned by Thomas Meynell, although his agent Jeremiah Cairns seems to have had an interest in it. Meynell recognised the commercial opportunities of providing shelter and hospitality plus a place to meet for railway and goods depot users, in addition to the drovers who traditionally used this route to drive cattle from Scotland to towns and cities in the south.
Both Inn Depot and the Yarm branch had an opening day event too in October 1825, although the depot was not quite complete. As we've heard already, the opening ceremony consisted of an excellent supper for the respectable tradesmen. The fact that, according to the newspapers, there were some 60 of these at the supper on the open evening, plus Mr. Meynell's band playing several appropriate airs, and about 50 workmen in an adjoining room, shows that this was a multi-room tavern with catering facilities. The band was joined by increasingly inebriated gentlemen singing, and one of the toasts was to the chairman of the railway company, Mr. Meynell. This tavern would inspire the S&AR to commission 3 more in 1826, and the model, together with the depot, would develop into what we now think of as a railway station. Incidentally, this is one of the few early railway taverns that appears to have much the same layout as it did in 1825, and yes, you can still drink in there. In fact, I hope the present landlord organises a celebration in 2025.
Thomas Meynell served the company for 7 years until 1828, when the extension to Middlesbrough was proposed. The proposal was led by other members of the committee, particularly the Pease family, and Joseph Pease in particular. Meynell was opposed to the Middlesbrough branch line because it would take custom away from Stockton and Yarm. In this he was supported by one of the S&AR's solicitors, Leonard Raisbeck of Stockton, and another committee member, Benjamin Flounders of Yarm, plus William Chater of Wotton Castle and William Luke Prattman of Barnard Castle, and various business owners of Stockton.
Meynell presented a petition against the bill for the branch line on March the 18th, 1828. However, the bill received royal assent on May the 23rd, and Meynell resigned along with the others who opposed the extension. Not only was Meynell concerned about the economic impact of this proposed new line to Middlesbrough, but he also decried what he felt was the disproportionate influence of Quakers in the company.
Outside of his service to the S&AR and band leader, he was a Deputy Lieutenant of Durham and a Justice of the Peace.
Thomas Meynell died in 1854, and his eldest son, Thomas Jr., inherited the estates. Now, things get a bit complicated after this. Thomas Jr. had worked with his father on the railway interests and became chairman of the S&AR from 1841. But when Thomas Jr. died childless in 1863, the same year the S&AR amalgamated with the NAR, the estates were supposed to pass to Edward, Thomas Sr.'s second son, except that he had died in 1856, only 2 years after Thomas Sr. So the estate passed down the male line to Edward's son, but Thomas Jr. seems to have made provision for his wife Jane when he died in 1863, leaving her the lands at Yarm, or more likely the income derived from them. This would have included Yarm Depot. Jane died in 1903 and the NAR were continuing to pay rent for the depot to her until that date.
Again, you can read more about Thomas Meynell in the Yarm book available at the Friends website.
Tales from the Rails, steaming ahead to 2025.
So, what's this month's news?
Well, the big news, and I'm quite excited about that, is that the S&AR music project is now complete.
We now know that music was an important part of the various S&AR celebrations. This music project reflects that played on the opening day of the S&AR between Darlington and Stockton, and at the banquet in Stockton's town hall, courtesy of Mr. Meynell's band from Yarm.
So we commissioned a specialist group of musicians, the Queen Victoria's Consort, to replicate this music on authentic instruments of the period.
There are 9 tracks and a set of videos where the musicians talk about the instruments they are playing. The tracks are
Auld Lang Syne,
Duke of York,
God Save the King,
Hail, Star of Brunswick,
Weel May the Keel Row,
Old Towler,
Scots Wha Hae,
and The Railway Gallop.
and Rule Britannia. This music will be available for anyone to download for whatever events you plan for 2025. And if you want, you can even sample the music or adapt it to make your own modern music. It's free. It's for you to enjoy and make use of, especially for 2025.
The videos are also free to download and will be of particular interest to student musicians and educators. The project was funded by the S&amp Community Grant Fund and the Friends.
So, do you want to hear some? The trumpet fanfare you heard at the beginning of this section is the start of God Save the King.
But perhaps the jolliest tunes is Wheel May the Keel Row. This is a Newcastle Way song about the keels on the Tyne closely associated with the coal industry. Given that many of the people who made the S&amp happen came from here and even included former keelsmen, it is an appropriate song to have included.
I have to confess, the tune has always been a playground game tune for me. Cat's Got the Measles. I wonder if anybody else remembers that, or is it just me?
I'm not going to say anything about age or anything like that.
Yeah,
so
I don't think boys played it anyway.
Oh, okay. Phew. Sticking with the musical theme, a new album inspired by the S&amp is due to come out in March 2025. The album is called Passengers and Pioneers and is by Sam Slatcher with 4 Northeast poets. Sam is an independent recording artist, singer-songwriter, and community arts facilitator. The first release is just out in advance of the whole album and is called Pioneers.
This opening track begins with the story of George Stephenson walking through the night to convince stakeholders in Darlington to finance his creative vision for a modern passenger railway, which would set the world on track. So here is Sam's Pioneers.
Set the town
Well, that was brilliant. I love the sound of locomotion number 1 trundling along.
The album has been written using archive history and the inaugural railway journey in 1825 on the Stockton and Darlington Railway, and stories collected from those travelling and working on the line today. It will be performed in celebration of the 200-year anniversary of the S&R. The release of this first single on the 27th of September marks the start of a year-long countdown to the bicentenary on the date of locomotion number 1's inaugural journey.
The album was commissioned by the railway companies Cross Country and Northern that now operate the line, along with the Community Rail Network and Bishop Line Community Rail Partnership, featuring poetry from Lizzie Lovejoy, Carmen Marcus, Rowan McCabe and Harry Gallagher. To create the content, they each spent time as artists and residents on the historic line, still in operation from Bishop Auckland to Saltburn.
The album tells the story of this short line connecting 2 northeast towns changed the shape of the region, the country and the world. From the global experience that railways became to the ways it brings communities together today.
It draws on a letter written by a 14-year-old boy, John Church Backhouse, to his younger sister, describing his trackside view of that first journey in 1825. On news reports from the 100-year anniversary, and from testimonies of railway workers throughout the ages, from station staff to engineers to those who work on board. The songs and poetry also feature stories of passengers who commute, holiday, encounter strangers, meditate from train windows, find love, seek work, find pride and belonging, and experience a sense of homecoming on those same 26 miles of track that opened in 1825. The album was recorded at Blank Studios in Newcastle, produced by John Martindale. Sam and the Poets are making plans to tour the songs and poems at venues across the North East and beyond in 2025. So if you'd like to host them for a night of stories, songs and poems, get in touch with them at storylines2025@gmail.com.
The Friends are still looking for subscribers for a beautiful new arty limited edition coffee table book, which will come out early in 2025. The first 300 people to subscribe to this book will have their names listed on the front, or, if you prefer, you can list the names of departed loved ones who perhaps worked for the railways or who had a passion for the railways.
The photography will be mostly by Darlington-based photographer Peter Giroux and the accompanying text by me, Caroline Hardy. The renowned railway artist John Wigston is contributing an especially commissioned painting of locomotion and its train having arrived at Stockton's Riverside on the 27th of September 1825. We also have some photography and drone footage from other members of the Friends. So if you'd like to pre-order this book and become a subscriber, then just go to the Friends website at www.sdr1825.org.uk and all should be clear from there. Remember to tell us how you'd like to be referred to in the list of subscribers.
And a reminder about the S&R Bicentenary Creative Writing Competition that is being run. We're looking for poetry, short stories and memoir pieces related in some way to trains and railways. These don't need to be specifically about the Stockton and Darlington Railway. We just want to see a clear link to railways, tracks and trains within the work.
You can find out more at the Tracks Darlington website, and we'll add the link into the podcast information later.
Our walk booklet covering the main line between Shildon and Hindon is being formally launched on the 27th of September at Locomotion. This was sponsored by Husqvarna, based in Newton Aycliffe, and included cake. Photos will soon appear on our Facebook page. Works are now starting on our Darlington Circular book. All of our walk booklets are available from our website, and you can also buy a folder to keep them in.
By the time you hear this, you should have got a flavour of what the 200th anniversary celebrations will be like in 2025, as this was announced on the 19th of September. If you missed it, take a look at the website SDR200. Don't forget there are lots of options to have local events wherever you are and be part of the S&R Fringe or the National Rail 200 events. So let's make this anniversary bigger and better than ever before, and importantly, let's look to create a long-lasting legacy that protects and conserves the remains so that they are still there for the 250th anniversary in 2075. That's it for another month. Thank you for listening. Hopefully you're all now in the party mood. time to get planning for your 2025 celebratory events, if you haven't done so already.
And thank you once again to Dave Reynolds for our theme music, to Chris Lloyd, feature writer for the Northern Echo, and to Sam Slatcher for letting us have an advance listen to Pioneers.
We're going to leave you with a Tales from the Rails exclusive, never broadcast before. Here, thanks to Lizzie Lovejoy and Sam Slatcher, is Lizzie Lovejoy's beautiful sonic poem, Take Me Home, from the album Pioneers and Passengers. It won't be released until later this year and will feature in our forthcoming coffee table book, along with Sam's Pioneers. Enjoy.
Take me home, to a place where the sea meets the sky, where seagulls cry out for your lemon tops, whether or not you are willing to give it. Home to a place where every cliff face is familiar, where the north wind hits my face with the force of a hug from a friend you haven't seen in years. Let the tears that sharp cold brings be everything. Let it hold me, scold me for my time away. Warmth had never felt so cold when it's found away from home. Take me home to a place where accents are so strong that it takes too long to decipher the sweetness of being called duck. To a place where they say morning lass every time that I pass, where bridges are industrial. They raise and they move and they swing, barely a stationary thing. At home, people love to walk in groups and they talk as they go, till their voices have echoed over every beach, dean, river and park. And after dark, no one wears coats, and the sky glows like it's had its ready breck oats. Take me home, to where words are real. People say how they feel, blunt and point blank, just as freely as they thank and they hug and they love and they give, because to live in my home is to be honest and raw, to walk straight through the door without knocking, because her house is his house is your house is home. We are not alone, because we are home, the people are home. Take me home, to a place with 3 a.m. Parmos again, where I'm craving a savoury and waving to kids on buses whose arms never tire is required, where buildings are old and it's no big deal, where the sound of the waves is enough to heal any stress, any strain, any struggle, any pain. To where it's 12 degrees, so everyone's knees are out for the sun and the heat. Where under our feet there is history, fossilized mystery or battles and old bricks. A place where everything we need to fix is done together as a team. Where every ice cream is iconic. Where half of our speech is sarcastic or ironic. Where the rain will always fail to derail our plans. Because for a barbecue on the sands, a storm-riddled day is a small price to pay. Take me home. Take me home to them. To where the kettle's on again before I even ask. I'm so far, but the train is getting close. Like it knows, like it can barely wait too, rather than just passing through. I am ready. Take me home.